The Intergalactic Combat Academy had a reputation that preceded it across 17 star systems, which was unfortunate because most of that reputation involved creative ways to turn promising young recruits into nutritious paste. Located on the grimly named Space Station Prometheus 7, the Academy specialised in what military brass euphemistically called character building, and what everyone else called legalised murder with educational benefits. Celeste Hawthorne had arrived 3 months ago with the same wide-eyed optimism that afflicted roughly 90% of new recruits. The remaining 10% were either psychopaths or had done their homework. Celeste, unfortunately, fell squarely into the former category, though her psychopathy levels registered disappointingly low on all standardized tests. She possessed the kind of unremarkable human appearance that made instructors forget her name mid-sentence. Pale skin that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Mousy brown hair that defied both gravity and styling products. And the sort of quiet demeanour that suggested she might apologise for existing if given sufficient encouragement. In an academy filled with 8-foot-tall Corvan warriors who could bench press small asteroids, and Zenthari assassins whose natural camouflage made them functionally invisible, Celeste stood out primarily for not standing out at all. The Academy's current enrolment boasted representatives from 43 different species, each bringing their own special brand of lethality to the training grounds. The aforementioned Corvans treated hand-to-hand combat like performance art, assuming the performance in question involved reducing opponents to component atoms. Zenthari moved with the fluid grace of liquid mercury, if liquid mercury could also decapitate you while humming show tunes. The Nexari contributed their legendary tactical minds, capable of calculating 17 different battle scenarios while simultaneously critiquing the cafeteria's attempt at synthetic protein synthesis. Then there were the humans, bless their optimistic little hearts, who compensated for their biological mediocrity with an alarming tendency to weaponize literally everything within reach. Academy maintenance crews had learned to bolt down anything remotely throwable after the infamous Great Stapler Incident of 2387. Academy Commandant Vex Ironscale, a 7-foot reptilian whose scales gleamed with the patina of countless battlefield victories, ran the facility with the sort of military precision that made atomic clocks feel inadequate. His philosophy centered around the revolutionary concept that surviving combat required actually experiencing combat, preferably the kind that left lasting psychological scars and an intimate understanding of one's own mortality. Combat instructor Naylor Buzzwing, representing the intertoid Hymerian species, possessed the delightful ability to hover menacingly while delivering lectures on creative applications of structural weakness in biological entities. Her compound eyes could track 17 different targets simultaneously, which proved invaluable during training exercises and utterly terrifying during cafeteria duty. The Academy's crown jewel, however, was what administration proudly called the Apex Trial. Every recruit, regardless of species, size, or likelihood of survival, eventually faced the station's resident apex predator in single combat. This tradition had endured for over 2 centuries, primarily because it solved the Academy's persistent overcrowding problem with remarkable efficiency. Celeste had spent her first 3 months demonstrating a consistent ability to finish precisely in the middle of every training exercise. Not spectacularly bad, which might have suggested hidden potential, nor remarkably good, which could indicate actual competence. She occupied that statistical sweet spot that suggested she would probably survive long enough to receive her certificate before dying in some moderately embarrassing fashion. Her combat scores hovered around the 42nd percentile. Her tactical assessments earned marks that could charitably be described as adequate for non-combat support roles. Her weapons proficiency tests generated the kind of shrugs from instructors that typically preceded reassignment to logistics divisions. The other recruits had initially attempted to include her in their various social hierarchies, but Celeste possessed the remarkable ability to fade into background noise even during direct conversation. She attended mandatory social functions with the enthusiasm of someone undergoing dental surgery, contributed to group discussions with monosyllabic responses that somehow managed to be both accurate and forgettable, and generally existed in a state of such profound averageness that betting pools had formed around whether she would simply evaporate from pure mediocrity. This particular morning found the Academy buzzing with its usual blend of anticipation and morbid curiosity. Weekly Apex trial selections had been posted, and the entire station held its collective breath while checking to see whose number had come up in Mortality's lottery. Celeste discovered her name on the list while standing in line for what the cafeteria optimistically labelled breakfast. The synthetic protein paste had been attempting to achieve the colour and consistency of actual food, with results that suggested the Academy's nutritional scientists had based their research on abstract art rather than biology. Her fellow recruits offered the standard mix of congratulations and preemptive eulogy that accompanied such announcements. A few exchanged meaningful glances that clearly communicated their shared belief that they were witnessing the beginning of the Academy's shortest Apex trial on record. Commandant Ironscale made the official announcement during the morning assembly, his voice carrying across the vast training bay with the authority of someone who had personally survived 17 different apocalyptic scenarios. Recruit Hawthorne will face the Apex trial at 1400 hours, he announced, managing to make it sound simultaneously routine and ominous. Standard regulations apply. No weapons, no assistance, no expectation of survival. The assembled recruits responded with the traditional moment of silence, though whether this honoured Celeste's impending demise, or simply reflected their collective inability to process the sheer statistical improbability of her selection remained unclear. Celeste herself received the news with the same mild expression she brought to most life events, as if being selected for probable death ranked somewhere between Tuesday and a particularly uninspiring lunch menu in terms of emotional impact. The rest of the morning proceeded with the Academy's usual blend of educational violence and administrative efficiency, but underneath the routine lurked the familiar electric tension that preceded each Apex trial. Betting pools updated their odds, medical staff prepared their most optimistic bandages, and the station's automated systems began their standard pre-trial diagnostics. Nobody, least of all Celeste Hawthorne, had any idea that in 6 hours the Intergalactic Combat Academy would witness something that would fundamentally alter their understanding of apex predators, human biology, and the basic laws of survival itself. But then again, the Academy specialised in surprises, and most of them involved creative applications of sudden deceleration trauma. The Academy's apex predator had a name that roughly translated to Void Stalker Primarch Zeph, though most beings preferred to refer to it using a variety of colourful euphemisms that ranged from the thing we don't talk about to oh gods, why does it have so many teeth? Zeph had been the station's resident nightmare for approximately 200 years, which represented an impressive career in professional murder, even by galactic standards. The creature's resume read like a horror novelist's fever dream. Over 3,000 confirmed kills across 2 centuries of Apex trials, with a success rate that made battlefield statistics look optimistic. Zeph belonged to a species that evolution had apparently designed during a particularly vindictive mood, combining the worst features of deep-sea horrors with the tactical intelligence of apex hunters and the general disposition of a rabid tax collector. Standing roughly 12 feet tall when fully extended, Zeph possessed the delightful ability to compress its form into spaces that defied several fundamental laws of physics. Its body consisted primarily of writhing shadow-black tentacles that could harden into armor plating or extend into razor-sharp appendages, depending on immediate murder requirements. 6 eyes arranged in hexagonal patterns provided 360-degree vision, while its mouth contained enough teeth to stock a small dental supply warehouse. The creature's hunting methodology had been studied by xenobiologists across the galaxy, primarily because understanding one's predator represented the first step toward avoiding disembowelment. Zeph preferred psychological warfare, using its natural camouflage abilities to appear as living shadow before materializing directly behind its prey. The few survivors of previous encounters reported that the creature seemed to enjoy the moment of realization when victims understood their situation, though enjoy might have been too anthropomorphic a term for whatever passed for emotion in Zeph's alien psychology. Academy medical records indicated that most Apex trials concluded within 30 seconds, with the more resilient specimens occasionally lasting up to 2 minutes. The current record holder, a Corvan berserker named Vorth the Unbreakable, had managed an impressive 4 minutes and 17 seconds before Zeph tired of the entertainment and concluded the exhibition with characteristic efficiency. The combat arena occupied the station's central hub, a massive cylindrical chamber that could accommodate various environmental conditions depending on the trial's requirements. For Zeph's encounters, the arena typically configured itself as a maze of shadows and recesses, providing the creature with optimal hunting terrain while giving recruits the illusion that cover might actually matter. Spectator galleries surrounded the arena on multiple levels, though spectator implied a level of voluntary participation that didn't quite capture the mandatory attendance policies. Academy staff occupied the premium seating sections, while recruits filled the upper galleries with the sort of morbid fascination typically reserved for traffic accidents and political debates. Betting pools had opened the moment Celeste's selection was announced, with odds heavily favouring scenarios involving rapid liquidation. The more optimistic wagers focused on whether she might last long enough for Zeph to work up an appetite, while pessimistic predictions suggested the creature might finish before the opening ceremonies concluded. Celeste entered the arena wearing standard-issue combat fatigues that had been designed with the Academy's usual attention to practicality over aesthetics. The uniform's primary function involved providing enough fabric to ensure that post-trial cleanup crews could identify which species the remains had originally belonged to, though even this modest goal often proved overly ambitious. She walked with the same unremarkable gait that characterized most of her activities, neither hurried nor deliberately slow, as if approaching certain death ranked somewhere between routine exercise and moderately inconvenient paperwork. Her expression maintained its characteristic mild blankness, suggesting that either she possessed hidden reserves of courage or had simply failed to grasp the fundamental nature of her situation. The arena's environmental systems had configured the space as a twisted landscape of artificial shadows and jutting metallic structures, creating the sort of environment where apex predators thrived and recruits discovered creative new definitions of terror. Ambient lighting provided just enough illumination to create the illusion of visibility while ensuring that every shadow could potentially conceal 12 feet of motivated murder. Academy officials occupied their traditional positions in the control booth, monitoring vital signs and calculating cleanup costs with a sort of professional detachment that came from witnessing thousands of similar encounters. Commandant Ironscale observed through reinforced transparasteel, his reptilian features displaying the mild interest of someone watching a moderately entertaining training exercise. Combat Instructor Buzzwing hovered beside the environmental controls, her compound eyes tracking multiple data streams, while her wings produced the sort of subsonic humming that indicated either concentration or impending violence. The distinction remained academically interesting, but practically irrelevant. The opening ceremonies proceeded with traditional efficiency. Academy protocols required a brief moment of silence for the soon-to-be deceased, followed by standard legal disclaimers regarding liability, organ donation, and the Academy's policy on posthumous grade adjustments. Zeph's entrance had been choreographed for maximum psychological impact over the course of 2 centuries. The creature typically began by allowing its presence to register as a vague sense of wrongness, then gradually intensified the sensation until prey animals achieved full awareness of their predicament. This process usually concluded with Zeph materializing from the shadows like a living nightmare, accompanied by the sort of sounds that suggested reality itself was being violated. Celeste stood in the arena's centre, rotating slowly to examine her surroundings with the same methodical attention she brought to inventory management and equipment maintenance. Her breathing remained steady, her posture relaxed, and her general demeanour suggested someone conducting a routine inspection rather than awaiting imminent dismemberment. The shadows began to move. Zeph's approach followed established patterns, with darkness seeming to coalesce and shift around the arena's perimeter. Spectators leaned forward in anticipation, while betting pools locked in final wagers and medical teams prepared their most optimistic stretchers. The creature emerged from shadow like oil rising through water, its form solidifying into the familiar nightmare configuration that had haunted Academy training videos for decades. 12 feet of apex predator materialized directly behind Celeste, close enough that its breathing should have registered as humid warmth against her neck. And then something unprecedented happened. Zeph stopped. The creature's approach halted so abruptly that its own momentum caused several tentacles to overshoot their intended positions. Its 6 eyes focused on Celeste with the sort of intense concentration typically reserved for complex mathematical problems or particularly puzzling crossword clues. Celeste turned to face the apex predator with her characteristic unhurried movement, meeting Zeph's hexagonal gaze with the same mild expression she brought to most social interactions. For approximately 15 seconds, human and apex predator regarded each other in complete silence while the assembled academy held its collective breath. Then Zeph did something that violated 2 centuries of established behavioural patterns. The creature backed away. Not the tactical retreat of a predator repositioning for a better attack angle, but the unmistakable backward movement of something that had encountered a situation requiring immediate distance. Zeph's tentacles retracted. Its posture shifted from hunting configuration to something that resembled defensive positioning, and its 6 eyes never wavered from Celeste's unremarkable face. Academy officials exchanged glances that communicated everything from professional bewilderment to the sort of existential crisis that typically accompanied fundamental paradigm shifts. Betting pools crashed as automated systems struggled to process outcomes that fell outside all established parameters. Zeph retreated further, its movements displaying the sort of careful deliberation that suggested the creature was reconsidering several basic assumptions about the nature of prey, predators, and the fundamental order of biological hierarchies. Celeste watched this performance with the same polite attention she might have given a moderately interesting lecture on supply chain management, apparently unaware that she was witnessing behaviour that xenobiologists would spend decades attempting to understand. The silence stretched across the arena like a physical presence. broken only by the subtle sounds of sophisticated life support systems and the occasional whispered prayer from spectators who had suddenly realised they were witnessing something that might require entirely new categories of documentation. Commandant Ironscale's voice finally cut through the stunned quiet, transmitted through the arena's communication systems with the sort of carefully controlled tone that suggested he was either having a stroke or attempting to maintain professional composure in the face of impossible circumstances. "Medical teams to the arena floor," he announced, though whether this was standard protocol or desperate improvisation remained unclear. "All personnel maintain positions pending further assessment." Zeph continued backing away from Celeste until the creature reached the arena's far wall, where it assumed something that could generously be described as a submissive posture. The apex predator that had efficiently dispatched over 3,000 opponents across 2 centuries was apparently requesting permission to leave. The Intergalactic Combat Academy had just witnessed its first Apex trial forfeit, and nobody had the slightest idea what to do about it. News of the Pale Flame incident spread across the galaxy with the sort of velocity typically reserved for celebrity scandals and declarations of interstellar war. Within 48 hours, Celeste Hawthorne had achieved the kind of fame usually associated with conquering heroes or particularly spectacular disasters, though nobody could quite determine which category she occupied. The Corvan Empire's initial response involved dispatching 3 battlecruisers to investigate whether humans had developed some sort of secret apex predator suppression technology. Their military strategists spent sleepless cycles analysing combat footage, searching for hidden weapons, pheromone dispensers, or evidence of psychic manipulation. The fact that their analysis revealed absolutely nothing interesting about Celeste somehow made the situation more alarming rather than less. Zenthari intelligence networks buzzed with speculation about human evolutionary adaptations that might have escaped previous xenobiological surveys. Their theory centered around the possibility that humans possessed some sort of dormant predator control mechanism, possibly triggered by extreme stress or mortal danger. This hypothesis gained traction until someone pointed out that Celeste had displayed roughly the same stress levels as someone choosing between sandwich options. The Nexari Collective approached the problem with characteristic analytical thoroughness, deploying teams of xenobiologists, combat psychologists, and apex predator specialists to the Academy. Their initial findings suggested that Zeph's behaviour represented either a complete psychological breakdown or recognition of some stimulus that transcended normal predator-prey dynamics. The fact that their most sophisticated instruments detected nothing unusual about Celeste only intensified their investigation. Academy officials found themselves hosting an impromptu interspecies conference, with diplomatic vessels arriving daily to study the human anomaly. Commandant Ironscale discovered that running a combat training facility was significantly more complicated when half the galaxy wanted to observe your most unremarkable student. The Academy's response involved subjecting Celeste to every available test that wouldn't violate interstellar treaties regarding sentient experimentation. Blood samples revealed standard human biochemistry. Genetic analysis produced results so thoroughly average that the laboratory equipment seemed to apologise for wasting everyone's time. Psychological evaluations suggested that Celeste possessed the emotional complexity of particularly bland custard. More apex predators were imported for additional testing, because Academy administration had apparently decided that if one impossible result was confusing, multiple impossible results might somehow clarify the situation. A Void Ripper from the Andromeda sector took one look at Celeste and immediately attempted to burrow through the arena floor. The legendary Shadow Drake of Proxima 7, whose previous career had involved terrorizing entire star systems, whimpering retreated to the furthest corner of its containment unit and refused to emerge. Most disturbing of all was the reaction of the Academy's prized quantum stalker, a creature that existed partially outside normal space-time and had previously demonstrated the ability to hunt prey across multiple dimensions simultaneously. Upon sensing Celeste's presence, it immediately shifted back to baseline reality and assumed what xenobiologists could only describe as a napping position. Betting markets across 17 systems crashed as traditional apex predator wagering became impossible to calculate. Insurance companies specializing in combat sports found themselves unable to assess risk factors when their primary variable refused to participate in violence. Several established gambling houses simply closed their apex predator divisions rather than attempting to explain the situation to increasingly bewildered customers. Celeste herself navigated her newfound celebrity with characteristic indifference. Interviews produced responses that could charitably be described as monosyllabic, while her daily routine continued to revolve around regulation mealtimes, equipment maintenance, and the sort of recreational activities that suggested her primary interests involved organised sock drawers and properly alphabetized reference materials. The Academy's administrative nightmare intensified when they realized that graduating Celeste required completing standard certification requirements, most of which involved demonstrating combat proficiency against hostile entities. Since every hostile entity on the station had developed an apparent phobia of her presence, Academy officials faced the unprecedented challenge of certifying someone who had achieved perfect combat effectiveness through completely passive means. Meanwhile, conspiracy theories flourished across the galaxy. Popular hypotheses ranged from secret human super-soldier programs to elaborate psychological warfare experiments. The most persistent theory suggested that humans had somehow weaponized their own averageness, creating a form of existential camouflage that confused apex predators into submission. After 2 weeks of intensive investigation, Academy officials reached the only logical conclusion: assignment to active duty. If the galaxy's most dangerous creatures refused to fight Celeste, then clearly she belonged in the most dangerous patrol route available. The decision represented either brilliant strategic thinking or the kind of desperate problem-solving that occurred when military bureaucracy encountered phenomena that defied classification. Celeste received her assignment with the same mild acceptance she brought to most administrative decisions, apparently unaware that she was about to patrol the sector where space pirates tested their most violent acquisition strategies. Celeste's first patrol assignment aboard the reconnaissance vessel Meridian's Edge proved that the universe possessed a particularly twisted sense of humour regarding cosmic timing. Her mixed-species crew spent the initial 3 days in a state of nervous anticipation, waiting for either miraculous demonstrations of human superiority or spectacular confirmation that their new crewmate was simply the luckiest being in recorded galactic history. Captain Oren Blackfin, a grizzled Aquarian whose previous career had involved surviving encounters that typically concluded with obituaries, assigned Celeste to communications duty with the sort of careful deliberation that suggested he was either protecting a valuable asset or keeping the potentially explosive human away from anything important. The crew's expectations received their first reality check when the Crimson Talon pirate fleet materialized from hyperspace with the sort of dramatic flair that suggested they had been practicing their entrance in front of mirrors. The notorious pirate consortium had built their reputation on deploying battle beasts that made Academy apex predators look like domestic pets. Creatures specifically bred for boarding actions and close quarters intimidation. Pirate Captain Vash Grimheart's opening communication followed traditional protocols, demanding immediate surrender while highlighting the various creative dismemberment techniques his crew had perfected over their illustrious careers. His threats gained particular credibility from the massive dreadstalkers visible through the attacking vessel's viewports. 12-foot-tall nightmare creatures that combine the worst features of apex predators with advanced military training. The Meridian's Edge prepared for what crew members privately calculated as their final defensive action, when something unprecedented occurred across the pirate fleet's battle frequency. The Dreadstalkers, upon detecting Celeste's presence through whatever sensory mechanisms guided apex predator behaviour, immediately ceased all aggressive actions and retreated to the furthest corners of their respective vessels. Captain Grimheart's subsequent communications displayed the sort of confused panic typically reserved for discovering that one's weapons had been replaced with decorative fruit arrangements. His boarding threats transformed into increasingly desperate attempts to understand why his most reliable assets had apparently developed acute agoraphobia. The pirate fleet's surrender followed within 30 minutes, though surrender implied a level of strategic thinking that didn't quite capture the wholesale retreat that actually occurred. Grimheart's final transmission suggested that his crew would prefer incarceration to remaining in proximity to whatever unholy power the patrol vessel carried. The breakthrough came during post-incident debriefing, when the Meridian's Edge was contacted by Professor Harun Nightwhisper, an ancient ethereal researcher whose academic career spanned multiple geological epochs. Nightwhisper had witnessed the incident through intercepted communications and recognized behavioral patterns that had apparently gone unnoticed by contemporary xenobiologists. His revelation restructured fundamental assumptions about galactic evolutionary history. Approximately 50,000 years ago, an apex species had dominated the galaxy through sheer predatory superiority, maintaining control over lesser civilizations until their mysterious disappearance had allowed current galactic society to develop. Every contemporary apex predator species had evolved in the shadow of these vanished overlords, retaining instinctive submission responses that had never been triggered until now. Humans, through some cosmic accident of evolutionary development, carried genetic markers and pheromone signatures nearly identical to the extinct rulers. Celeste represented not an anomaly, but humanity's accidental inheritance of galactic apex status, a biological legacy that had remained dormant until triggered by proximity to creatures whose ancestors remembered absolute submission. The implications cascaded through galactic society like a particularly vindictive avalanche. Military strategists realized they had been training thousands of beings who possessed unconscious dominion over their most powerful weapons. Diplomatic corps scrambled to reassess treaties with a species that had unknowingly conquered the galaxy through bureaucratic oversight. Academy officials faced the terrifying realization that their graduation ceremonies had been accidentally coronating apex predators rather than military personnel, while Celeste herself remained primarily concerned with completing her combat certification requirements. The final irony emerged during her performance review, where she received marks indicating satisfactory completion of patrol duties, though Academy administrators noted that her methods required further study before they could be incorporated into standard training protocols. Humanity had achieved galactic dominance through the simple expedient of showing up and being thoroughly unremarkable, which seemed appropriately human when viewed from certain philosophical perspectives.